Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We're excited to bring you a review of the 2019 ERP report. There we go. And my name is Chris DeVault. I'm manager of software selection here at Panorama Consulting, and I've been in the ERP space just about 20 years now. I actually started off on the reseller side, reselling and implementing different handful of softwares, large and small, and manufacturing, distribution, professional service focused. And going on my 5th year here now at Panorama, and just excited to still be part of the team.
Hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa Davison, Managing Partner of Panorama Consulting Solutions, and I have 20 years experience as a CEO, COO, and CSO with IT and finance reporting to me. Been involved in multiple turnarounds and mergers and acquisitions, and I have 7 years in consulting, particularly professional services and public sector experience.
Great. We're particularly excited today. We think this is one of the most comprehensive reports that we've ever done. And we've got a good response rate. We'll go over the respondents and their demographics here in a few minutes, but this certainly does help us better serve our customers when we're really getting a pulse of the industry out there. And again, looking forward to sharing one of the most comprehensive reports we've ever done. And just quickly, we're giving away an hour of free consulting to the first few handful of respondents. After today's webinar, we'll provide a little bit more detail there, but would certainly like for anybody to take advantage of our service and our subject matter experts to get a good feel for what we do. This is a brief agenda of what we're going to be going over today. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Panorama Consulting Solutions, who we are and who we serve. We're going to go over the respondents, again, a little bit of demographics on the respondents to our survey that really drove the ERP report. Then we're going to jump in and take a closer look at people, processes, and technology that are highlighted. We're also going to set the stage for some of the follow-up deep dives that we're going to do to go into more depth. There's just no way that we can address this whole report and the content within the hour time frame. And then we're going to open it up to questions, so feel free to send questions over via the app here as we go or towards the end.
And here at Panorama, we specialize in different services such as digital strategy, ERP selection, ERP implementation, change management, business process management, and we cover a wide range of industries, as you can see on the screen, all the way from manufacturing to government, nonprofits, retail, ag, food and beverage. And our experience, it goes quite deep, Lean Six Sigma, MBAs, and decades of industry consulting, vendor. And one important thing is that most of our consultants actually come from industry, not the consulting background. So it's kind of, we walked in your shoes, been there, done that. And so we bring that experience forward. And as you can see, we have a breadth of client experience. You can see a lot of different clients of all sizes. Once again, you see retail, nonprofit, professional services, government, manufacturing, and distribution, and that just allows our wide breadth to expand into all kinds of different industries.
We're fortunate enough to have a large client base of all sizes. We do work with startup companies, maybe in the high-tech industry that don't have any revenue, all the way up through the small and mid-market business, all the way to the large enterprise where we have a $20+ billion steelmaker as well. So that, just as Vanessa had mentioned, the breadth of experience really provides well for our clients who get exposed to all sorts of different projects. And then from the vendor side, this is a snapshot of some of the vendors that we've worked with in the past and have good relationships with. Again, here, this correlates with the size of the clients. So we've got tier 1 enterprise type application vendors on the top there, you can see. And then as you go down and even from left to right, we've got tier 2, tier 3 vendors. And we also have vendors that specialize in human capital, workforce management, nonprofit, And we've even got some niche applications for companies that really serve the supply chain management, demand planning, and forecasting. There's also a couple on there that we've worked with from the construction industry. So really good, again, good experience across all the tiers and across a lot of different industries as well. Going back to the agenda here, we're going to go over a brief overview of the respondents to give you an idea of who actually responded to our groups. The ERP report, really the purpose is to dive into the independent research that we've done stemming from the surveys. We're going to provide you an overview of some of the trends that we've seen, not only from our survey results, but also what we see as boots on the ground from our projects, from ERP, ERP selection and implementation, all the way through, really digital transformation, digital optimization as well. And then again, we're going to touch on some more of the deep dive stuff that'll be coming in future webinars. So this is a quick snapshot of the people who responded to our surveys. You can see that the information was collected over a 2-month time frame. We had a good response in that, almost 250 employees with a whole, a large number of organizations represented in there. The average annual revenue of those respondents was 1.7 billion. So if you look at kind of the curve there, you've got outliers on the far right hand side, I would say, as multiple $1 billion, but then you also have respondents that are in the small mid-sized market as well. Average number of employees for the entities that had responded is just over 1,000. So again, we're getting good enterprise type information, at the same time getting a lot of good mid-market type data as well. You can see we've touched on the number of licenses, multinational organizations, and then a percentage of the organizations that had actually completed the implementation, within the last year and a half there. Now, this is just a quick snapshot of the industries that were represented, everywhere from manufacturing down to healthcare, energy resources, retail. You can see the largest three: manufacturing. Then there's also IT and services, a lot of consulting firms or professional services, and then you have the straight financial companies that offer project management as well. There it goes through public sector, wholesale, distribution, and retail. And Vanessa was going to touch on kind of the importance of the widespread industry representation.
Yes, when some of the consultants are focused on very industry specific, and the wide breadth of Panorama actually allows us to go across industries, pull best practices, and just allows you to have exposure to all the vendors. For example, we have some public sector clients that operate like a business, like City of Pembroke Pines, and they were very adamant about, we don't operate like a public sector, and we more like a business. So our breadth of experience has allowed us to go across all industries.
Yeah, and those best practices certainly come into play. We're fortunate to get the exposure that we do, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go here. Next part of the agenda, we're going to take a deep dive now into the report itself, and we're going to look at the people, processes, and technology. So the first one, and really going in order of the ERP report itself, we're talking about ERP implementation and selection here. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on selection. Vanessa's going to be highlighting the strategy and alignment coming up. But it's really important for our clients to understand, why are we going through ERP selection? Why do organizations reach out to firms or go through the exercise themselves? But you really need to identify the right reasons, the correct reasons why you're doing these projects. I'll give you the example of, one good reason to do an ERP project implementation is leveraging technology as a competitive advantage within your industry versus just saying, our support is ending on our current project or product, and we need to switch. So you really need to go in. There's two different mindsets when you really have goals in mind up front of what you're looking for. You also need executive sponsorship from the top all the way down to the end users from management team as well. So that's, again, another important aspect of it. And then doing it right the first time. You know, most companies, a lot of companies that have never gone through an ERP implementation or a large technology project, they think that they can do it on their own. And you know, in some aspects, they can leverage a lot of the project, but they do need some expertise, overall project management and change management and whatnot. Some of the things that we see are, you know, documentation of current state versus future state. And you know, and very important to do a lot of this stuff up front, as opposed to doing these exercises after you've selected a vendor, and really when you're on their dime, their clock is ticking for service, and you're still trying to flush out what your requirements are. Vanessa has a good example of a client in that situation.
Yeah, that's correct, Chris. You know, after years of turnarounds, you know, one common theme is to get strategy and alignment nailed down. I know it's painful work, but it's a key factor also in the success of an ERP implementation. You know, we had one of our CFOs comment to us that, you know, spending money up front lessens the more expense, you know, lessens the expense during implementation, and just brings a little bit of that best practice up front, like you said, talking about requirements gathering and doing current state is very important. And, you know, during design phase, that just lessens the time and expense for the client.
That's exactly right. And we'll again talk about best practices and standardization. And really, you want to do a lot of these exercises on your own. That way, you don't have to necessarily go down the path that a vendor may lead you, you know, right or wrong. You want to get as much of that stuff done prior to your selection and during your implementation design phase. So going on to the next one, a little bit more around selection and implementation, and really making sure that you're looking at the goal. What's really the goal of this initiative? And then you start to work backwards from there. Now, we see all sorts of different combinations of applications that are going in. And again, this is when we prioritize functional areas. This is important to have these exercises completed before you actually go into the selection. So we're seeing companies who are doing, you know, financial management and operational management, meaning that they are doing, you know, maybe supply chain activities, manufacturing activities. They also want the full back end of the finances. So that'll be one project. We see other groups that are just doing financial management, and maybe they mix in some omni-channel, so trying to improve the customer experience with an e-commerce platform. And then we look at, you know, projects that involve human capital management and financial management. Again, depending what size of company you are, the vendors have a different mix of solutions, some standalone, some fully integrated, and you have to properly identify what you're really looking at, such as, you know, is workforce management inclusive of our human capital or our HR project? Do we want to include payroll as part of this project, or continue to outsource it? From a customer experience, and I put, you know, customer experience and name whatever other kind of functional area that you need. So customer experience would include, you know, marketing, maybe our pipeline and sales from a customer relationship management is in there. And then, you know, configure, price, quote. We see that as one of the difficult areas. Some people need that included. Some people will just do a IT project around configure, pricing, and quote. You also have to align that. You have to ask yourself the question: how long does this solution? What's the targeted time frame for this solution? Some clients of ours, you know, want to do this ERP replacement. They only want to do it once, and they want a permanent solution. Some groups know that things are going to change, and maybe it's a 5 to 7 year, maybe it's a 7 to 10 year solution, and that'll also kind of lead them to go down, you know, do we include finances? Do we include manufacturing? So you kind of have to work backwards, really what the end in mind is here.
And also, you know, with digital technology, not just improving the customer experience, but also meeting the customer expectations and the demands. You know, with the e-commerce platforms, where, you know, they're all integrating with ERP systems. You know, you're looking at customer data, dynamic pricing, and real-time way, and the real-time information with the supply chain as well. And also, what you have to think about too is that you have a lot of workforce changes. You know, a lot of the baby boomers are retiring. You got millennials entering the workforce. So you got different ways of working. So the digital technology, the digital tools that are coming into the ERP systems is very important and a major reason why a lot of companies are integrating e-commerce and going to a new system.
Now, we wanted to put a quick definition around the tiers. We identify and we talk quite a bit about tier 1 versus tier 2 and tier 3. So we wanted to put some definitions around this so people could better understand. And really, I don't like to focus necessarily on the revenue of a company, but you can see we've listed tier 1 at 750 million and above. It's more related to the functionality and the complexity. So some of these vendors, tier 1 vendor is looking for organizations that are more enterprise level, and they may have multiple entities to manage, and they have a lot of complexity around their operations. So the upper tier 2 organizations, they may serve multiple industries, they may have multiple business units, but usually they're a little bit smaller in size and employee number. Then you have lower tier 2, and you can also see we've positioned some of those vendors per tier here as well. Tier 2 companies more in that small to medium size range when they're serving typically one customer, and they usually are only managing one entity. And then the tier 3, we see a lot of point solutions and maybe a little bit more of the startup mom and pop type companies here. So the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, as far as vendors, they're very paralleled along with what size of organization. I want to put some definition there. Now, this is a quick snapshot of what our respondents are looking at by an implementation approach. And now when we talk about implementation approach, of course, it could be done in multiple ways. You can see a majority of the companies that were responding as they transition from their legacy system to the new system, they're choosing a phased approach by module. So it's maybe by module, maybe it's by functionality, but they are certainly implementing it in a phased approach. The second group of respondents, they did do a big bang approach, and this is where things get a little bit different because I think everybody's got a different view of what the big bang is. Typically, a big bang is, especially in an enterprise multi-locations, you're going to pick 1 or 2 locations that have similar functionality, and then you're going to implement. You could be implementing many locations at the same time, but you're going to implement basic functionality that runs the business. So from order management to cash management, even some procurement and some operations in there. But these companies are deploying most of the system all at once. Then you have the hybrid approach, and then you have approach by business units as well. So they just differ, and there's not one right approach. What we really do with our clients is define and understand how it's going to be the best rollout between your teams and your subject matter experts. Even personalities and locations really come into play of how we're going to define that approach. So each one's pretty unique and different here. Now, because of time limitations, we can't cover everything that we wanted to hear today. We're going to do a future deep dive explaining the vendor landscape. We're going to give you some more data on our clients making that shift and how they make that shift from their legacy. We want to explain a little bit more about the cloud because each of the vendors is offering cloud applications, but each of the vendors really have gotten there and configured their systems in different ways. So it's critical to understand how they're getting to the cloud. And then we're really going to do a deep dive into the pre-implementation approach and the outcomes there. So what can be done prior to purchasing software? What process improvements can be made? How do you really set your team up for success going into implementation once you have a good idea of who your vendor is there?
And then another important piece about implementation and the selection is strategic alignment. A clearly defined digital strategy, of course, is very essential, and you hear a lot about that. It's important to have a strategic roadmap with key objectives, KPIs defined, and executives and middle management being aligned and really being aligned with expectations of what the technology is going to do. People and process must support the defined strategy. This ensures the organization receives most benefits from the technology. Successful ERP implementations are those that focus on using digital technologies to enable improvements in operating processes, business models, And also keeping employees, you know, developing those digital competencies, which is also important when you're doing a digital technology initiative, is how to digitize the processes and people and use the technology to enable that goal.
Yeah, very important to align those people and processes and have technology enable that. All too often people think that technology really leads the project, and that's not necessarily the case.
You know, and then we go into the people and process aspect of this, and we talk about business process management. And we do see that a lot of people, they don't spend the money in BPM, but this is very important, you know, to map out current processes, identify pain points, and design a future state. We typically use a top-down approach that is called value stream mapping. And the top-down approach really aligns that strategy to the business process and the people. You know, BPM really allows you to see processes across functional areas and business units to eliminate redundancies and improve customer experience, which really allows for that operational efficiency that we talk about. And me being with a strong operational background, I really look at the ROI and that operational piece of it, because we also want to increase the net margins to the company. Look at Amazon, that's a perfect example. How people and process actually were able to increase that customer experience from ordering something online to delivery to your door, you know, enabled by technology, and really aligning your processes was really important.
Yeah, they certainly set the bar on the customer experience there, and unfortunately not everybody has as many resources to spend on technology as Amazon, but we can certainly you know, look at them as a model. As far as, you know, the business process management, wanted to touch on the standardization and the best practices, because this is often something that our clients struggle with. I think it came out a little bit in the report as well, of, you know, how do we standardize, where do we standardize our processes, where do we take advantage of best practices. All too often companies are evaluating new systems on their current state, and they get stuck on the current state, which is typically a whole handful of workarounds and limitations due to their current system and technology. So really understanding what are the best practices, how can we leverage you know, a consulting firm and or the vendor to educate us on best practices, and then how do we make a change, where do we make a change to start implementing some of those, knowing that that's going to help streamline that the implementation of technology there. And then from an operational standpoint, again, just touching on that, it's very critical to define those goals, define those KPIs, because you need to, you know, you need some sort of reference check and measurement, not only during implementation, but after you've gone live, of how you're still lining up with those and matching up that business performance there.
And then we go to people and looking at organizational change management. The way we look at change management is really melding the traditional approaches to modern times to enable a digital worker. And, you know, a lot of the traditional OCM is communicate and engage employees from across the organization throughout the project. This allows you to understand the culture and basically where you need to focus. And you do that via focus groups and business readiness assessments. And also integrating people and processes is challenging, which involves more than a communication plan. A lot of people think that OCM is just a communication plan and some training, but you know, you really got to think about your people and take into account, for example, a field operator currently using a clipboard now needs to use a mobile device. So how do you mobilize, no pun intended, to become, you know, a digital employee from a clipboard employee? And also, when you talk about ERP and or digital transformation initiatives, you got to think about how that fundamentally changes an organization's key processes and operations. So you're looking at ways of improvement and how you work and how you think. So an OCM plan should have a full management plan that incorporates a holistic approach that involves viewing it from different perspectives, such as culture, structure, workflows, processes, and also digital awareness. So that executive buy-in really ensures that ERP aligns with the organization's overall strategy. And what we found is that this is the toughest part of an implementation, is really the change management aspect of it. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what our respondents did as it relates to change management activities. So you have communication plans at the top. So take a minute to look at those statistics, as these are the key areas that were most common amongst respondents. And it's also in our ERP report.
Yeah, it's so critical to understand and help set expectations, organization-wide here. We had a client, 4 years ago, we did a project with them, and their main, from the top down, the messaging was, we don't need change management, please don't mention change management activities. And then 4 years later, when they're behind in some of their rollout, the new focus as they're implementing different technology, a high focus on change management. And that was one of their leading initiatives, was to make sure that they did that properly in order to reduce the risk and the duration and whatnot. And then there's a snapshot of some ERP results, really stemming from what, why did the budget go over? Why did our project extend, either from a time duration or unexpected costs? And you can see some of these, main contributing factors really are planning up front. We can't tell you how important it is to get the proper requirements gathered as you're doing your current state and your future state. We really see that as the stepping stone to make a successful selection and implementation. And most people just don't have the proper requirements, and they can't tell the story well enough to the vendor to have the vendor properly design the system. So you can see some of those top ones there was, the scope was expanded and the consulting fees were underestimated. We had unanticipated organizational issues. There's a lot of, could be turnover, there could be competing projects that you have to deal with. So all of these things, you need to take into account during your selection, even really before you pick a vendor. And then one too fast there, a little bit on the time frame. So we talked a little bit about budget overruns, but again, why did we go over? And again, the time frame was unrealistic from an original estimate standpoint. And that really goes back to not properly gathering requirements, not properly defining. And you see data issues, and again, scope was expanded, conflicting with other priorities, and then obviously the organizational change management issues as well. So those are the top reasons from our respondents for the duration overrun there. And then we did want to highlight some benefits and expected versus perceived as we go in here, because there's so many entities that think that they need all this advanced functionality. I'll use advanced demand planning and demand forecasting. All too often, groups think that they need that advanced functionality in order to receive benefits and start to pay off for the system. But what we always see in our implementations, as companies are implementing basic out-of-the-box functionality, maybe as phase one, they are receiving all sorts of benefits that maybe they had not expected. Just because they're on new technology, users are figuring out how to use and leverage the information and data differently. And then what we see is, a year or two of that basic functionality, then grow into the system, and then start to pick and choose where we want to implement some of that advanced functionality. And that's when you're really going to see, benefits tenfold of what you've seen. All too often, though, our clients and people in the in the industry think that they're going to receive benefits, think that they need advanced functionality to receive benefits, and that's not necessarily the case. Another example of this, basic functionality that we see benefits a lot in is the workflow automation. Getting updated technology and the ability to automate things such as a purchase order approval or any of those other examples of automation behind the scenes, you're becoming more efficient, and you're already seeing benefits just from basic functionality. Integration and data visibility is a prime example there as well.
And as we look at the ERP implementation results, two key lessons learned from the report was the focus on investment and change management. So we saw that employee adoption often determines the success of the ERP initiative, And in many of our expert witness cases that we've done in the past, we've noticed that this was a key failure point for some of those clients that had failed implementations. And also, you got to bear in mind that digital transformation requires heavy investment in digitizing the workforce and involving those workflows and change management. So one thing to keep in mind is that even though respondents were generally satisfied with vendors due to increased technology than their current legacy system, we found that more benefits can be realized in the long run once you align the people and the process aspect of it in that implementation. We also found that many organizations did not realize, those full benefits right away, because people actually, if they're not engaged in the implementation, they actually find ways to work around the system due to lack of training and expectation. So employee performance plans may change in relationship to the new system capabilities. So that's an example of kind of what that change management will do. Once again, it's not typically about just a communication plan and training. It's really about looking at it holistically in the new workflow.
That's certainly one thing that we want to avoid, is investing a whole bunch in technology, taking the time to implement it, and then having users do workarounds so they can work the way that they had previously in the old systems. Obviously, that is counterintuitive to what we're trying to do.
And one of the questions too in the ERP report is just thinking about the importance of ERP consultants. The survey results indicated that most organizations do use consultants for ERP initiatives. And, having been a COO and a CSO for many years prior to going into the consulting world, I used to joke that I used to kick consultants out of my office, but quite frankly, we did use them as it related to business process management and change management, because for us that was key. And that's usually what we have found, is that sometimes outside consultants can help with difficult discussions about people, operational legacy, ways of thinking. Organizations also become stale after many workarounds and cultural baggage, is like I like to call it. We walk into companies and we ask, why is it being done this way? It's just the way that it's been done to work around certain people, giving certain people positions. So, having a consultant is really having a fresh pair of eyes and being that third party outside person that can actually get alignment across the organization. And we found in our survey that many did not use consultants for, process and change management, which is interesting because in my career as a CEO, that's what we usually used our consultants for. And it's good because if you get good consultants that kind of come in and teach you how to fish, and when they leave you behind with deliverables and documents that can actually enhance your team's performance in the future, and you can continue improvements along the way. That's the most effective way to use a consultant. And as we look at how should success be defined, that's a very interesting question because there's many different perspectives and every company is going to be different. Every organization is going to define success differently. And I can give you my experience as a C-suite member. Success to us is really about the value to our customers. How do we remain competitive and achieve an ROI? And really, when you think about achieving an ROI, you could achieve it from a financial perspective, which is what we look for, but you also achieve it via increased revenue, lower operating costs, innovation, and employee retention. As a CEO, I was able to execute this strategic plan, meet the key objectives, and build a profitable company. That's really what I define success. And technology was just an enabler of all those things. Chris, at the end user level, how do you define success?
Yeah, so from an end user, and I like to use the, maybe the people on the shop floor or within the warehouse, and what does success look like to them? So it's going to be different than the things that we've listed out here and that we saw in the report itself. But success for an end user is, one, are they able to, do their jobs more efficiently? Maybe they went from, pen and paper, and now they're using handhelds and they're doing more scanning. and they're able to be more efficient in their, either their picking and their packing, their put away, their staging and whatnot, order consolidation. But from an end user, am I leveraging the technology properly? Am I putting in the right amount of data? Once people are trained on the systems, they kind of realize the importance of data and upstream and downstream. For example, it's very important when sales, the people that are starting the engagements with customers, they're setting some expectations. It's very important for them to capture the right amount of data around pricing. Maybe it's quantities, maybe it's a contract that they're doing. All these things get lost in the mix if they're not really in the system. So the proper input of data and what we need certainly has a ripple effect throughout the organization. And I think when end users realize that maybe we need to take an extra minute or two to populate some more data fields because it's what operations use or it's critical to finance, that's what we see as more defined as success from an end user standpoint, really leveraging the system and leveraging technology to improve their day-to-day operations. So getting a little closer to the end here, we wanted to just to give again, we showed you some survey results. You can certainly download if you haven't already the report itself. We wanted to show how the data correlates with our respondents, and again, trying to give boots on the ground experience what we see in the industry, in addition to some of the things in the data that we've provided here. So again, stay tuned for future deep dives. We're going to be talking more about change management. We're going to be talking more about the actual people and process improvement in future sessions here. And then a little bit more information on that, the free consulting hour. So please feel free to go to our website and request one of these, depending on, independent of what subject matter expert you are, what you're looking for. We'd like just to get some exposure to our team and see how we can help. We can certainly help in many ways other than, just a traditional management consulting firm would do here as well. So we're going to look at some of the questions here. Hold on just a sec. And one question, once you choose a vendor, how long can you negotiate on pricing? So that is certainly a good question. Negotiation services is part of what we provide as a service to our clients. So you can certainly take the time that you need to negotiate. I always say that we really need to understand what software we're purchasing. We want to make sure we are getting a fair market price for that software and that functionality. And then you really need to line that up with your statement of work. So there's certainly negotiations that could be done around pricing and terms and whatnot, but what our negotiation process is really flushes out is a complete understanding of the statement of work and how each of those functional areas are going to be implemented. Another question here, and then what amount of training is expected, per employee? So I think that is a great question, and we often see the training coming up. One of the things that we do help establish that kind of differentiates ourselves from the vendors is really the overall importance of developing a training strategy. So a lot of the vendors have great training methods. They have videos, they have recordings, they have documentation, but it may not be specific to your application, meaning if you have some customization or you have some user-defined fields that you've added to collect certain amounts of data, usually their training material is not going to be included in that. So what we see a service for our clients that we add is how do we develop a training strategy, and what is also the readiness of the organization to really implement these.
Yeah, and it really depends on the organization. And when we do the assessment, we'll be able to tell you how much training it will be for recommended per employee, and it just really depends from organization. I mean, we've seen it anywhere from 10 hours per employee all the way to a full month's worth of training. And that, like I said, really depends on the culture, the aptitude of your employees. And training is not just training on the system, it's really just training on, also training on the workflow of the new employee. You know, like I said, for example, you have one employee who's going to be moving to a tablet to take orders. What's that training going to look like?
Yeah, there's a handful of questions coming in. One good question around, trends around SaaS, so software as a service versus on-premise, and I would also add into their cloud, and that's actually going to be one of our future deep dives. Is we're really going to take a look at what the cloud means to these vendors. We are certainly still seeing on-premise software being purchased, but most likely to be hosted at a data center. And then obviously, each of these vendors is coming out with a cloud versus a SaaS model, and it's very important to understand how they got there. What are the pros and cons of a SaaS model? For example, single tenant versus multi-tenant, and then the ability to customize and configure and be more self-sufficient. So yeah, we're certainly going to jump into that in a future deep dive, because there's a lot of data around the cloud versus SaaS versus on-premise there.
Yeah, and here's another question. If we have experience in working with nonprofit organizations, we actually have a lot of experience in working with various nonprofit organizations. So if you want more information, just feel free to give us a call. Public sector is absolutely one of our key strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some more questions around, implementation and getting into subject matter experts, and what does success look like at the different levels of an organization? And we're actually going to touch on that in a future deep dive as well, when we talk about change management and end user adoption, because it certainly varies of what a C-level sees as success. A business owner may say, hey, we implemented the system, we went live in 9 months. That's what we anticipated. That's success in my mind. And an end user may say, well, we went live in 9 months, but I didn't get all the functionality that I was kind of promised during the sales cycle. So we are going to dive into that a little bit deeper in a future presentation as well. Let's see another one. Yes, and yeah, good question around, so this is an operational manufacturing question around basically the disassembly of a product. So it's a good one, because it's a very unique position in the manufacturing space, where a lot of, most companies are building things and they have a bill of material that the ERP systems are geared for. Most of these ERP systems are not necessarily geared for disassembly. There's all sorts of nuances that come into play. For example, when you're disassembling and refurbishing an engine, how do you schedule and forecast on what parts are going to be good, what parts need to be refurbished, or what parts need to be scrapped in general, and then where else can these other parts be used? So yeah, it's a great question. It is difficult for the ERP systems to handle some of those reverse bill of materials. There's complexity there, but yeah, there's certainly a handful of vendors that handle it out of the box and/or with extended solutions.
Yeah, there's a question about what would success look like with respect to ERP implementations for somebody in finance and somebody in purchasing. I would say somebody in finance, is just having real access to real-time data, being able to look across the organization at what orders are coming in, what's shipping out, and so forth. So having access to that real-time data in finance is very important. What do you say to the purchasing manager? What would define success?
Well, defining success for a purchasing manager. So one, establishing best practices. A lot of companies don't use requisitions as a best practice, and a requisition is, the desire to buy something. So you basically have buyers who are going to request things to be purchased from a purchasing manager. What that really looks like is, helping consolidate. How can I get best approvals? How can I really make my, best economic order for my purchases related to quantities? And then when do we need them? When do we really need them? Do we need them yesterday, or are we buying too much and we don't need as many for our next production run. So it varies, but yeah, success from a purchasing manager may be around automation and certainly leveraging the system to make more optimal buys. Some companies, they carry high value of inventory, and that's one of the most common things where we can see a cost savings is the reduction of inventory valuation. But on the flip side of that, some of our distribution customers, they do carry a little bit more inventory because they want the ability to service their customers as a one-stop shop. So when they have maybe a national emergency arises, and their customers are asking for them for more than out of the ordinary, that's when the benefit of carrying a little bit more inventory comes, because they can offer that as a one-stop shop for their customer there.
And here's another question. If we offer formal training for teams about to embark upon an ERP initiative? And the answer is yes. We do have formal training. If you go to our web page, it's called ERP University, and we can customize it for you, anywhere from change management, process management, and even technology, and what to expect in an ERP implementation. So pre-implementation training is our most common service offering, just because it helps getting the teams ready to embark on that ERP initiative.
Yeah, and then there's some other questions, about training. There's some questions here about change management. There's a question of, what are the future deep dives going to look like? So I think that, the questions that are flowing in now are certainly all relevant to what we plan to cover. So I would say stay tuned, within your email, and also, continuing to visit our website. But we will certainly launch a schedule of future deep dives that we're going to take in regards to this 2019 ERP report, and we'll give you a little bit more data on when that's going to come, because I think that'll relieve a lot of the questions that we're getting now, because we just don't have the time to address each one of those. But I know they're in the content that's coming up. So wanted to thank everybody for joining today, and make sure to we've got Laura Florence's name up here and her contact information, her email address, and obviously our website. Laura is our Director of Business Development, and would love the opportunity to speak with anybody, or certainly align them with the right resources from Panorama. So any other questions here, you could send over here to Laura. Any other requests for follow-up, or that request for the free hour of consulting, make sure to contact Laura. And with that, thank you very much for your attendance today. And Vanessa, appreciate your input.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sticking with us.
Thank you all, and everybody have a great day.